And welcome once more to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me, Juan Zarate. He's our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
Some quick moving developments now regarding the crisis in Ukraine. There's apparently some kind of deal, or at least the beginning framework of a deal. What do you make of this?
Well, Russia, the United States, European Union, and the Ukrainians sat down in Geneva today to try to hammer out a deal that would diffuse the tension and the unfolding crisis in the Ukraine. Reading the text of it and listening to Secretary Kerry, you have some key dimensions of this. One, that there would be a disarming of the militant groups, that the buildings that have been occupied will be vacated and returned to their rightful owners or controllers, that there would be no further intimidation or provocative actions, that you would have an OSCE monitoring team allowed in to monitor the de-escalation of tension. And so you have the building blocks of an attempt to stop the escalation of violence in the east, in the south, in the Ukraine. What this doesn't do is lay out a framework for longer-term stability in Ukraine. Things like what's going to happen with the elections, what's going to happen with the Ukrainian economy. And it doesn't address specifically things like Russian troops on the border, though it does talk about not wanting provocative actions from any of the parties. So this is an attempt to diffuse tension. We'll see if it sticks.
But just to be clear, so these agents that are inside Ukraine now, acting perhaps as agents of the Russian government, they have to pull back, they have to stop? What does this require?
That's what the requirement says. Now, the question is, who's really in control of those militias and bodies on the ground? The Russians have disclaimed any involvement, covert or otherwise, with stirring up these tensions. And so you have to ask yourself, well, are these militias actually going to vacate the places that they've occupied, these government ministries and offices? So this is all interesting and important from a diplomatic standpoint. The question is on the ground what really happens and whether or not the parties at the table can actually impact what's happening on the ground. For the Ukrainians, obviously they're committing to not take further strong steps, but they're going to have to continue to consider military action if, in fact, these militias don't vacate government property.
This pays lip service to the will of the people on the ground there, but what do you do in a region where there's a real split? I mean, some people in eastern Ukraine favor Russia. They wouldn't mind joining the old federation. And others are loyal to Kiev.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And this is in part what makes this situation so difficult, because in part Russia, and you've heard President Putin do this, they use the language of self-determination of peoples and the defense of peoples and cultures that may be under assault, like the Russian people in Crimea. And so that has been a core principle of Russian activity throughout this crisis. But I think what you do is you retreat to processes and principles that involve inclusion of everybody in a dialogue. And that's in part what this agreement does. It talks about respecting a constitutional process that has all voices at the table, that ensures that there's no discrimination in any way based on ethnicity, background, et cetera. And that in some ways is a way to retreat, to say, look, we're going to have a process of national dialogue that is a part of the healing of this crisis.
So in the near term, next couple of days, next week or so, what do we need to see or not see to know that this is working?
Well, I think there's probably three things you need to watch. One, do the militias actually vacate the property that they've taken, right? So that's one. Two, are there acts of provocation in some way where you continue to see arms of people or bands of people being provocative on the ground, forcing the Ukrainian government to respond? And third, I think watching very carefully what the Russians do. What do they do with their troops on the border? Are they going to be helpful or provocative, if not openly, then perhaps quietly? So I think those are three factors to watch. All of that in the tableau and watching the tableau of political developments as we march toward the May elections in Kiev. And I think that's critical in this equation.
So this may buy a little time and space for everything to calm down, but it's not an end point.
Yeah, this is an attempt to prevent further conflict and fueled tension, but we'll just have to see. And this doesn't mean that the conflict and the crisis is over.
All right, Juan, thanks as always.
Thanks
to you for watching Flashpoints. We'll see you next time.